Words are bridges.
शब्द सेतु हैं।
अल्फाज दिलों को और इंसानियत को जोड़ने का एक अजीम और तरीन पुल है।
വാക്കുകൾ പാലങ്ങളാണ്.
लफ्ज़ सवेरी कदल तारान
വഹൈനത്തും
आखर हमार मेल सन आखर हमार जोड़
শব্দই সমন্বয়ৰ হেতু
Cocktail yakraise.
Thuhi inkung kainasiam tu ani.
Ajrahana apati kisale.
Grauthaining yaukrai.
Shabda setu hun.
शब्दां दी सांस।
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of our festival co-directors Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple, festival producer Sondroy Roy, and all of us at Teamwork Arts, I welcome you back for a very special session of Jaipur Literature Festival's Words Are Bridges. We are delighted to announce that our session today is with S. Hareesh and Jayasree Kalathil on the book Moustache that has just won the 2020 JCB Prize for Literature. Here he comes, Moustache of Kaipuzha, S. Hareesh and Jayasree Kalathil in conversation with K. Sachidanandan. Originally published in Malayalam as Meesha, S. Hareesh's Moustache is a novel of epic dimensions and a contemporary classic mixing magic, myth, and metaphor. Here, Hareesh and his award-winning translator, Jayasree Kalathil, speak with the renowned poet K. Sachidanandan about the work's deep roots in the history, geography, politics, and folklore of the Kutanad region, and how the fabulous is sometimes the truest way to depict real lived experience. S. Hareesh is the author of 3 short story collections, Adam, which received the Kerala Sahitya Academy Award, Rasa Vidya Yude, Charitaram, and Apan. He's also a recipient of the Geeta Hiranayan Endowment, the Thomas Mundassery Prize, and the V.P. Sivakumar Memorial Prize. Moustache, Meesha in the original Malayalam, is his first novel. Hareesh is also the author of 2 screenplays, Edan, which received the Kerala State Award for Best Screenplay in 2017, and for the 2019 film Jallikattu, which premiered at the Toronto Film Festival and won a Silver Peacock at the International Film Festival of India. His book Moustache has recently won the JCB Prize for Literature. Jayasree Kalathil's translation of N. Prabhakaran's novellas Diary of a Malayali Madman won the Crossword Books Jury Award for Indian Language Translation in 2019. The book was also longlisted for the Mathrubhumi Book Award 2020. Her translation of S. Hareesh's Moustache was published in 2020. Kalathil is the author of The Sackcloth Man, a children's book that has been translated into Malayalam, Telugu, and Hindi. Outside literary pursuits, she's a researcher and activist working in mental health and human rights and has published widely in this area. K. Sachidanandan is a Malayalam poet, bilingual critic, essayist, playwright, travel writer, fiction writer, and translator. He was earlier Professor of English and Secretary of the Sahitya Academy and has authored 60 books, including 25 collections of poetry. His collections have appeared in more than 20 languages, including Arabic, Chinese, English, French, German, Italian, and Japanese, besides most major Indian languages. He has won 52 awards for poetry and overall literary contribution, including the Sahitya Academy Award, Kerala Sahitya Awards, the Ezutha Chan Award, the highest government honor for a Malayalam writer, the Bombay Tata Lit Fest Poet Laureate Award, the International Poetry for Peace Award from the government of the UAE, knighthood from the government of Italy, and the Indo-Polish Friendship Medal. Before we move on to our next session, we request you all to follow us on our handles JLF Lit Fest on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get notified on our upcoming sessions. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Lit Fest JLF, and on our Facebook page, JLF Lit Fest. We now present Here He Comes, Moustache of Kaipuzha, S. Hareesh and Jayasree Kalathil in conversation with K. Sachidanandan.
Hello, welcome to Hareesh and Jayasree. We will have a brief discussion on the translation of Moustache, which is a masterpiece from the young generation of Malayalam fiction writers. We will deal a little with the novel itself, and then we will also enter into a brief discussion on the translation and the kind of challenges that the translator had to meet while translating a difficult book like this, difficult from the point of view of translation. I'll begin by reading a small portion of the opening of the very book. It's a chapter called Tricksters. I read. Most people believe that Inam Pechi, the animal also known as Alunku or Pangolin, is a divine creature like the stork or the owl, and that the spirits of dead children appear in its form. But Pavian, who lived on the embankment of the Choryapara fields, knew for a fact that they were also somewhat stupid. In the months of Makaram and Kumbham, very early in the mornings, Pavian would walk east to the mango tree near the dwellings of the Vaniyan folk to collect the mangoes, small enough to be held in one hand, and be squeezed over a bowl of kanji that would have fallen to the ground overnight. This task was made stupidly easy by an industrious Inam Pechi, who would have done the work of gathering them up through the night. Greedy for mangoes, the Inam Pechi would arrive as soon as the sun set, but instead of eating his fill, he would set about collecting the windfall to carry home with him, rolling each mango into a pile, one at a time, two at a time, three at a time. But it was a never-ending job, as the mangoes would keep falling throughout the night, and at daybreak, having run out of time, the Inam Pechi would leave without having eaten a single mango. All Pavin had to do, arriving just as the creature left, was transfer the pile of mangoes into the basket. One night in the month of Karkidagam, Pavin had gone to the homes of those with overfilled grain chests and stores of paddy to ask for a handful of rice, and was walking back home empty-handed in the scattered light. He saw something shaped like a ball in his path. It was the Inam Pechi. He picked it up, thinking it might amuse his children, make them forget their hunger for a while, and put his children and put it in his basket. He walked fast, hurdling over fences and water ditches, and he heard a voice. Slow down, Pavya, slow down. He realized that the Inam Pechi was aware of who he was, and yet bore no grudge against him. This is how the great novel opens. I have said elsewhere that it is a novel of epic dimensions, and I really meant it. And I can easily say that it is one of the finest novels to come from the new generation of Malayalam fiction writers. Of course, Hareesh was already known as a great writer of short fiction, but with this, he established his place in Malayalam literature also as a major novelist. We have had many novelists from the Kuttanad area, but this novel is very different from the other novels that the area has given us. Because Meesha is a multi-layered narrative, and it captures the textures of everyday life in the region, employing several linguistic registers, which must have posed a challenge to the translator. Depending on the context, the classes and the castes which are involved. So its setting with its unique landscape, its fragile ecology, its culture, which is deeply linked to agriculture, mainly wetland cultivation, its caste structure and the impact of the social transition in Kerala led by Sri Narayana Guru, Ayyankali, and quite a few others who came from the so-called lower caste, and the diverse fauna and flora peculiar to the region gives the novel a very, very distinct character, even among those novels, as I said, which had come from Kuttanad earlier, like the novels of Thakazhi Shivashankara Pillai, for example. And the novel captures both the prose of everyday life and also the poetry of the waterscape of that particular region. Vavachan, who is popularly known as Meesha, Moustache, a Dalit who keeps his mustache, which he had grown to act in a play even after the event, challenges the authority and hegemony enjoyed by the upper caste in the region, and legends that grow around him give him a kind of mythical aura. The novel thus turns real life into a kind of fable, nuanced fable, without losing sight of the existential struggles and the evolving history of the region. It poses many challenges to the translator that we will, of course, take up in the discussion with the translator Jayasree, who has done an excellent job of translating this extremely challenging novel. I would like Hareesh to tell us and our listeners something about the origins of the novel, the genesis of the novel. How did it first come up in his imagination? Did it come from his own first-hand experience of a character? Did it have something to do with the short stories which he had already written? How long did he toy with the idea of the novel, and what kind of preparations he made for the novel? So was it a real life story which got gradually transformed into a legend or a myth? So can you tell us something about the setting of the novel and the origin of the novel? You can speak in Malayalam if you are more comfortable with that, I will try to sum it up in a few words once you speak. Yes, Hareesh.
Thank you, sir. സാറ് പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ തന്നെ തുടരാം. ഒന്നാമത് എനിക്കിതിന് പ്രേരണയായത് ഈ സ്ഥലം തന്നെയാണ്. കുട്ടനാട്, അപ്പർ കുട്ടനാട് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന സ്ഥലം തന്നെയാണ് എനിക്കിത് പ്രധാനമായിട്ടും പ്രേരണയായത്. അത് ഞാൻ ജനിച്ചു വളർന്ന സ്ഥലം തന്നെയാണ്. എല്ലാ എഴുത്തുകാർക്കും അവർ ജനിച്ചു വളർന്ന സ്ഥലം വളരെ പ്രധാനമാണ്. അവർക്ക് കിട്ടുന്ന വിഭവങ്ങൾ ജനിച്ചു വളർന്ന സ്ഥലത്ത് നിന്ന് അധികം സാറിന് അറിയാവുന്ന പോലെ തന്നെ. അപ്പൊ കുട്ടനാട് ഒരുപാട് പ്രത്യേകതകളുള്ള സ്ഥലമാണ്. ജലനിരപ്പിന് താഴെ കൃഷി ചെയ്യുന്ന സ്ഥലമാണ്. മനുഷ്യരുണ്ടാക്കിയ സ്ഥലമാണ്. മനുഷ്യരുണ്ടാക്കിയ സ്ഥലങ്ങൾ ലോകത്തിൽ വളരെ അപൂർവമായിട്ടാണെന്ന് ഞാൻ വിചാരിക്കുന്നത്. മനുഷ്യർ ക്രിയേറ്റ് ചെയ്ത സ്ഥലമാണ്. പിന്നെ അതിന്റെ ഉത്ഭവം തന്നെ നമുക്ക് ദുരൂഹമാണ്. നമ്മള് പാടത്തേക്ക് ഇറങ്ങിയാൽ ഒരുപാട് മരങ്ങൾ കാണാം. വിജനമായ സ്ഥലമാണെങ്കിൽ ഒരുപാട് കാട്ടുമരങ്ങൾ അവിടെ കാണാം, വീണ് കിടക്കുന്നത്, കരിഞ്ഞു കിടക്കുന്നത്. എങ്ങനെ ഉണ്ടായെന്ന് നമുക്ക് അറിഞ്ഞുകൂടാ. ഒരുപാട് ബുദ്ധമത വിശ്വാസം ഒരു കാലത്ത് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന സ്ഥലമാണെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കേട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. കുട്ടനാട് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ബുദ്ധന്റെ നാടാണെന്ന് കേട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. അങ്ങനെ ഒരുപാട് പ്രത്യേകതകളുള്ള സ്ഥലമാണ്. ഒരുപാട് മിത്തുകളും ഐതിഹ്യങ്ങളും കഥകളും ഒക്കെ ഉള്ള സ്ഥലമാണ്. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ എന്റെ പ്രധാന പ്രേരണ ആ സ്ഥലമായിരുന്നു. ഈ സ്ഥലത്തെ കുറിച്ചൊരു എന്റെ എഴുത്തിൽ എന്തെങ്കിലും കൊണ്ടുവരണം എന്നുള്ളത് എന്റെ വലിയൊരു ആഗ്രഹമായിരുന്നു. അതിന്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ടാണ് ഈ കഥ എന്നിലേക്ക് വന്നതും. അതിന്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ടാണ് ഈ വാവച്ചൻ എന്ന ക്യാരക്ടർ യഥാർത്ഥത്തിൽ ഞങ്ങളുടെ നാട്ടിൽ ജീവിച്ചിരുന്ന ഒരാളാണ്. മീശ എന്നാണ് അദ്ദേഹത്തെ വിളിച്ചിരുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ അദ്ദേഹം ഈ നോവൽ പറയുന്ന പോലെ തന്നെ ഒരു നാടകത്തിൽ പോലീസുകാരന്റെ വേഷം കെട്ടിയ ഒരു ദളിതനായിരുന്നു. അതിൽ പിന്നെ അദ്ദേഹം ആ മീശ എടുക്കാതിരിക്കും. അദ്ദേഹത്തെ കുറിച്ച് ഒരുപാട് കഥകളും കെട്ടുകഥകളും ഒക്കെ പ്രചരിക്കുകയും ചെയ്തു. എന്റെ ചെറുപ്പത്തിൽ ഞാൻ ഒരുപാട് അടുത്ത് കണ്ട മനുഷ്യനാണ്. ഒരുപാട് കൗതുകത്തോടെ നിരീക്ഷിച്ച ആളാണ്. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ എനിക്ക് അതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് എഴുതാൻ, ആ എഴുത്തോട്ട് ഞാൻ വന്നത് അതുകൊണ്ടാണ്. പിന്നെ ഇത് നടക്കുന്ന പശ്ചാത്തലം സാറിന് അറിയാവുന്ന പോലെ തന്നെ 20-ാം നൂറ്റാണ്ടിന്റെ ആദ്യ പകുതിയാണ്. കേരളത്തിൽ സാമൂഹിക പരിഷ്കരണങ്ങൾ നടക്കുന്ന കാലമാണ്. വിദ്യാഭ്യാസം കൂടുതൽ പേരിലോട്ട് വരുന്ന കാലമാണ്. അങ്ങനെ ഒരുപാട് പ്രത്യേകതകൾ ഉള്ള കാലമാണ്. മതം മാറ്റങ്ങൾ, ക്രിസ്തുമതത്തിലേക്കുള്ള മാറ്റങ്ങൾ ഒരുപാട് നടക്കുന്ന സമയമാണ്. പിന്നെ ഇതിന് എന്നെ സംബന്ധിച്ച് ഒരുക്കങ്ങൾ അധികമൊന്നും വേണ്ടി വന്നില്ല എന്നാണ്. അതായത് ഇതിലെ റെഫറൻസുകൾ, കാരണം ഇതിലെ കഥകളൊക്കെ ചെറുപ്പം പോലെ ഞാൻ കേൾക്കുന്നതാണ്. ഈ സ്ഥലം എനിക്ക് അറിയാവുന്നതാണ്. എന്നാൽ അതോടൊപ്പം തന്നെ ഞാൻ ഇതിന്റെ ഒരുക്കത്തിന്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ട് ഞാൻ കുട്ടനാട് മുഴുവൻ കാൽനടയായിട്ട് കുറെ സഞ്ചരിക്കുകയും ചെയ്തിരുന്നു. അത് പല സമയത്തായിട്ടാണ്, ജീവിതത്തിലെ പല കാലഘട്ടത്തിലായിട്ടാണ്. തുടർന്ന് ഒരു 50 വർഷം ഇത് എഴുതാനെടുത്തു. എഴുതിയപ്പോൾ എന്നെ നവീകരിച്ച ഒരു നോവലാണ് മീശ എന്നാണ് ഞാൻ കരുതുന്നത്. കാരണം അത് എഴുതി തുടങ്ങുമ്പോഴുള്ള എന്റെ രാഷ്ട്രീയമല്ല എഴുതിയതിനു ശേഷമുള്ള എന്റെ രാഷ്ട്രീയം. നോവലിനെ കുറിച്ചുള്ള എന്റെ കാഴ്ചപ്പാട് മാറ്റിയ ഒരു നോവലാണ് മീശ. അതിലേക്ക് വളരെ സന്തോഷമുണ്ട്. പിന്നെ ഇത് ഇറങ്ങിയ സമയത്തുണ്ടായ പ്രശ്നങ്ങൾ അറിയാമല്ലോ സാർ. അതായത് ഒരു മാതൃഭാഷ പ്രസിദ്ധീകരിക്കുകയും അത് പിൻവലിക്കേണ്ടി വരികയും ഹിന്ദുത്വ ശക്തികളെ എതിർനിൽക്കുകയൊക്കെ ചെയ്യുന്ന കാര്യം അറിയാവുന്നത്. അത് സുപ്രീം കോടതിയിൽ നിന്ന് ഒരു വിധി ഉണ്ടാകുകയും മീശ അതിന് മുമ്പ് തന്നെ മീശ നമ്മൾ പ്രസിദ്ധീകരിക്കുകയും ഒക്കെ ചെയ്തു. വ്യാപകമായിട്ട് വായിക്കപ്പെട്ടു. ഇപ്പോൾ അത് കൂടുതലായിട്ട് വായിക്കപ്പെടുന്നുണ്ട് എന്നാണ് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നത്. ഒരുപാട് പേര് അതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് സംസാരിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്, എഴുതുന്നു. വളരെ സന്തോഷം. ഇത് ജയശ്രീക്ക് ഞാൻ പ്രത്യേകം നന്ദി പറയുന്നു. കാരണം ജയശ്രീ സാറ് പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ അസാധാരണമായൊരു വർക്കാണ് ജയശ്രീ ചെയ്യുന്നത്. ഈ പുസ്തകം ഇംഗ്ലീഷിൽ നന്നായിട്ട് വായിക്കപ്പെടുന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ അതിന്റെ പകുതിയിലധികം ക്രെഡിറ്റ് ഞാൻ ജയശ്രീക്ക് കൊടുക്കുകയാണ്. അതുകൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ മലയാളത്തിൽ മീശയുടെ ഒരു ഭാഗം വായിക്കാം. മീശയുടെ അമ്മ ചെല്ല മരിച്ചതിന് ശേഷമുള്ള ഒരു ഭാഗമാണ് ഞാൻ വായിക്കുന്നത്. മൃതദേഹത്തോടുള്ള ആദരവാണ് മരണാനന്തരം ചെയ്യേണ്ട കർമ്മം എന്നറിയാവുന്ന മീശ തനിയെ വലിയൊരു കുഴിയെടുത്ത് അമ്മയെ അതിൽ കിടത്തി. കൈകൊണ്ട് കുഴി മൂടി മുകളിൽ ചവിട്ടി ഉറപ്പിച്ചു. ശേഷം തൊട്ടടുത്ത് മറ്റൊരു കുഴിയെടുത്ത് പുല്ലുകളും ചപ്പുകളും കൊണ്ട് മറച്ച് അതിൽ ഒളിച്ചിരുന്നു. മരിച്ചതുപോലെ കണ്ണടച്ചും ശ്വാസം പിടിച്ചും നീണ്ടു നിവർന്നു കിടന്നു. അർദ്ധരാത്രി കഴിഞ്ഞപ്പോൾ അവൻ കണ്ണു തുറന്ന് ചെവി ഓർത്തു. തൊട്ടപ്പുറത്തെ കുഴിയിൽ നിന്നും അടക്കി പിടിച്ച സംഭാഷണങ്ങൾ, എന്തോ വേല ചെയ്യുന്ന ശബ്ദങ്ങൾ. കാലന്റെ കിങ്കരന്മാർ എത്തിക്കഴിഞ്ഞെന്നും അവർ 4 പേരുണ്ടെന്നും മീശയ്ക്ക് മനസ്സിലായി. അവർ അമ്മയെ 4ആയി ഭാഗിക്കുകയാണ്. പതുക്കെ പുറത്തിറങ്ങി മീശ കുഴിയിലേക്ക് എത്തി നോക്കി. ചുറ്റുപാടുകൾ ശ്രദ്ധിക്കാതെ സ്വന്തം ജോലി ചെയ്യുന്ന തിരക്കിലാണ് അവർ. മനുഷ്യരെ പോലെയല്ല, ഒരേ സമയം ഒരു കാര്യത്തിനെ അവർ ശ്രദ്ധ വെക്കാൻ കഴിയും. അവരെ കബളിപ്പിച്ച് ഒരു പങ്ക് അപഹരിച്ച് മീശ വീണ്ടും കുഴിയിൽ ഒളിച്ചു. അല്പം കഴിഞ്ഞപ്പോൾ കുഴിയിലെ ശബ്ദങ്ങൾ ഉയർന്നു തുടങ്ങി. നേർത്ത വർത്തമാനങ്ങൾക്ക് പകരം വലിയ ആക്രോശങ്ങളും തെറിവിളികളുമായി. മീശ ശ്വാസം അടക്കി പിടിച്ച് എല്ലാം ശ്രദ്ധിച്ചിരുന്നു. കാണാതായ ഒരു പങ്കിനെ ചൊല്ലി കിങ്കരന്മാർ തമ്മിൽ തല്ലുകയാണ്. ബാക്കി കാര്യങ്ങൾ ജയശ്രീ സംസാരിക്കട്ടെ. കൂടുതൽ വിവർത്തനത്തെ കുറിച്ചുള്ള കൂടുതൽ കാര്യങ്ങൾ സംസാരിക്കട്ടെ. സന്തോഷം.
For those who don't know Malayalam, I won't translate what Hareesh said, but I would just say that first he said that Kuttanad is his birthplace, and naturally any writer will have a kind of profound and deep attachment with the place where he or she was born. And Wawachan, the protagonist, or who is also called Meesha, was a real character around whom a lot of legends grew, and it was from those stories that he collected over the years that he began imagining this whole novel. In the introduction, he has said he took about 12 years to prepare to write the novel. He traveled around the whole of Kuttanad. He studied the landscape. He studied the people, the various kinds of dialects. And so it is with enough preparation that he started writing the novel. And he also said that the writing process has changed his attitude, one, to the novel as a genre. And secondly, it has also changed his political attitude, because this has been also seen as a novel of Dalit empowerment, because by keeping the moustache, the Meesha, Wawachan in some sense was challenging the hegemony of the upper caste in Kuttanad. So it was a novel which transformed the author, and of course which is expected to transform also the reader in an equal measure. This is what mainly he said. He read a portion from the novel which deals with the demise of the protagonist's mother. Now I will turn to Jayasree. I'll ask you something about the process of translation. I don't think we have much time to go into deep theory of translation, even though we are all familiar with all those theories, right from Gayatri Spivak to the cannibalistic theory and all that. We won't go into that. Let me ask you some very simple questions. How did you come to translate the novel? I know that it was a commissioned translation, if I understand rightly. It was commissioned, yes. But even then, even when somebody asks you to translate a novel, you don't really jump at it unless you are ready to do that, and unless your own mind tells you that this is a novel worth my time. This is a novel that I need to translate, and this is a novel that's going to be a contribution to the larger corpus of Indian literature or even world literature. So that's what actually tempts you into the act of translating a novel. So what were your temptations? What were the things that actually drew you into this novel and into this very hard task of translating a difficult work?
Okay, yeah, like you said, I was asked to translate it by Rahul Soni at HarperCollins because I'd done just one book before that for them. I had read Meesha when it was being serialized in Madhubhumi. So when he asked me, I had only read those 2 first installments. I hadn't read the rest of it. So I told Rahul that first I need to read the book because I haven't translated much. This is only my second book. But even when I'm interested, I want to be interested in the story initially. So he sent me the book to London and I read it, actually traveling back to Kerala for bizarre reason. So yeah, but I really liked it. That's the first thing was just falling in love with the book and the world that Hareesh has created within that book. And I love storytelling of that type where there is so many stories layered. And, you know, it kind of takes you into different places. It's not just this linear narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. And so I like that kind of almost oral tradition of storytelling, which builds one on top of the other. So that was obviously one of the reasons. And the language is the next. It's lyrical in places. It's in your face in places. There are many languages within the book. So this is quite a challenge as a translator, and I was really, really scared to begin translating. That first section that you read at the beginning, I think I probably rewrote that about 10 times and then left it and only came back to it at the end of the book because I just couldn't start the book at the beginning. So it was in that sense it was really, really challenging, but in a very interesting way. The other interesting thing is just the diversity and the language Hareesh has used to talk about the land, the waterscape, the flora and the fauna and the fish. And I have this fascination with nature and just being able to play with language itself more than anything of the real story or the politics, etc. All of that is important, but having a chance to do that, all of this drew me to translating it. By no means a simple task. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, it must have been very difficult to capture the whole texture of the novel, especially because there is a kind of interweaving of both short narratives and of languages, as you very well said. How did you grapple with that, and how did you finally come out, if I can say, successfully? Would you say something about it?
So usually as a translator, people ask you about how do you translate not just the language of the novel, but the culture of the knowledge to a reader who is not familiar with that culture. But I feel that with Meesha, the translation begins even before you're trying to put it into English. I am from Malabar, from Malappuram, up in the hills, and my language is very different from the language Hareesh has used in Kuttanadu. Kuttanadu is as exotic to me as it is probably a Londoner, because I've been there on holidays, I've seen it in films, I've read it in literature, so I'm familiar with it, but I'm also very unfamiliar with it as a culture, as nature, as geography. So there is first a translation that I am doing within myself in terms of being familiar with this world Hareesh has created. And there is just only one way to do that, and that is just by immersing yourself in the text. I literally lived Meesha for several months. Not 12 years that it took Hareesh to write it, but long enough to kind of get used to that. And Hareesh also, through the story, he also demands us to look very closely to it. I mean, the repetition of place names, for example, where somebody travels, he literally tells you all of the little places and the detail in flora, fauna, etc. What that told me is that you have to look really closely at this. You have to kind of get into it. So I read a lot about below sea level farming, about how they built up paddy fields out of nothing, about all kinds of fish and looked at pictures of snakes and trees, and so there was a kind of trying to build that around me. The actual translation itself, like I said, I didn't do it in an order of. It's only in the second draft I kind of went through the order. In the first draft I did wherever I thought I will do, not in the order from chapter 1 to the end. And there are many languages in this book. So, for example, there is when the narrator of the story speaks to his son, that is a different language from when he's talking about Vavachan and his adventures, or when he is describing nature, or there's a whole chapter made of songs of the fields and the water wheels. So there is more than one language in the book. So you can't really kind of just think about language. It is about, I think it kind of evolves in a way that it works. And I'm sure there are places in the book where it probably hasn't worked. But as long as those who read it feel that it has worked, I would be quite happy, I think. One thing I kind of refrained from doing is to try and sort of find an English that is like a patois or existing English and try and fit it back into a Kuttanadan dialect. I didn't want to do that. And I hope I haven't done that. At the same time, I also did not want to mainstream it entirely to make it comfortable reading, because the book is not comfortable. And I don't think the translator's job should be to make it comfortable reading for everybody. So I'm hoping that that weight of the book is still there in the translation.
Yeah. See, one thing I noted about the book is that you haven't given, thankfully, many footnotes and appendices, and there is not much referencing and all that in the book, because in many Indian translations, they are mostly cluttered with references and footnotes, making reading almost impossible. But you have very cleverly and deliberately, I think, avoided such elaborate footnotes in that. Was it a conscious decision not to give so many footnotes and leave it to the reader? Of course, partly it is possible now because of the internet. A lot of people can go to the net and find things. It is easier than it used to be before. But was it also part of your decision to make the reading easier by not having many footnotes and appendices and references and all that?
It was, yes. I think part of that has to do with the fact that I don't like interrupting my story. As in, if I'm reading a book, I don't really want to see footnotes. If I want to find something out, I'll find out when I'm ready for finding out. So but I think probably the more important reason is that I'm a writer who writes from London. So I'm a minority here. As a migrant and minority, there is always the question of how you use English. You are expected as a minority, as a migrant, to explain yourself all the time, because the English is their language, and where they don't, you don't write, you're not expected to write like a minority. You are expected to cater to the mainstream, and I refuse to do that. It's like I will write like a minority, and you will make the effort to read it. Maybe it is arrogance, I don't know, but I think it is also the politics of it. And there is a way you can bring in a lot of explanation into the text, but without taking it away, without derailing it too much from what Hareesh's storytelling is doing. But we did actually consider putting in a glossary at the end, not as footnote, maybe a glossary to sort of explain something. But then we thought, whatever we wanted to explain, and specifically, I think one of the main things that we were discussing about explaining was the whole caste relationship that was in the book. But I think Hareesh's introduction covers it quite well and quite in depth. So we didn't feel like we needed another, glossary, or then translate some of the Malayalam words that I've retained, like for names of fish or whatever. We didn't feel the need to do that. I think the book is difficult, yes, but I think it is, people will get it when they read, I think.
Yeah, I know that translation is a kind of rope walking, because you cannot be too literal. You can't do that because then it becomes tedious, reading the translation. At the same time, you can't deviate very much from the original. So you need to keep a kind of balance. You cannot erase the authorial presence from the text even when you translate. So the author ought to be there somewhere. So it needs to read well, but it also needs to read like a translation. Walter Benjamin, who says in his famous essay Task of the Translator, that a translation should read like a translation, not that it should read like original. And I think you have perfectly managed that kind of a balance, because when you read it, it is a translation. It comes from another culture, it comes from another language, or it comes from many languages. And at the same time, you are able to navigate easily through all those various layers of caste and class and language and dialect. And that must have been, I think, the greatest challenge that you faced as a translator. You, in your note to the translation, you refer to the magic realism of Hareesh's novel. That reminded me of because I think that comes from actually a kind of realism. Because it reminded me suddenly of an interview that Pablo Neruda had given towards the end of his life. He was asked, I think it was an interview with Robert Bly, who was one of his first translators. Bly said, well, there's a lot of surrealism in your poetry. How come that you are you a surrealist? And Pablo Neruda said, well, the reality of Chile is surrealist, and that is what you find in my poetry. And I think this applies very well to a novel like Meesha, because the reality of Kuttanad itself is surreal, with all those very strange animals, various kinds of fish, various kinds of plants, and the remains of the forest, as that Hareesh referred to in his introductory talk. So there is something surreal about the whole place. And that is made even more surreal by the presence of the protagonist, Vavachan, who grows a moustache, and a moustache which itself grows into a major fable or a myth. And so I think this peculiar kind of juxtaposition of the real and the surreal, or the real and the magical, and that's what gives the novel a character which is very different from a novel like Kayar by Tagari, which is also based in Kuttanad, or his other novels like Chemmin. Even the Chemmin has a minor mythical dimension to that. It's related to a kind of belief among the fishermen. So there is so I think Hareesh has achieved a perfect mixture of this of the real and magical. And you, in your translation, have been to a very great extent able to capture that kind of a conversation between the real and the unreal, or the surreal. I think that is one of the basis of the success of your translation. I would like you to read maybe a portion from your translation, something that you yourself had suggested, because our time is running out, and I think it will be good to have a room of a portion.
So I'll read a section where there's the two main places in the book where the flood is described and what happens to the land after the flood. So just a small section from one of those.
Please do.
The rain that began after Chella's death continued, relentless even after 10 days. Those were days when no one ventured out, but there were those who saw Vavachan walking along the field edges in Pulikutisheri, Menongari, Kaligatra. He had spread his moustache over his head like a giant taro leaf, sheltering himself from the rain. His moustache protected him like the dry leaf protected the mud clod in the old story. He was a lucky man. He did not need to look for a place to sleep. He could just build a tent with his moustache when night fell. Perhaps these were just the hungry illusions of those stuck at home with nothing to eat. Some even said that they saw Moustache carrying a sack of rice on his head. But how could that be when there was not a grain of rice not even oil pumice or bran to be had. Several people died eating bitter tapioca leaves. Others ate the palm shoots that were meant to feed the ducks, or the fish, clams, and mussels they could find, boiled in salted water, as there was no chili or coriander to be had. They ate through the yams and banana stems and turned their attention to cattle feed. Some Christians and Nayars who had seed stocks of paddy meant for the next planting season hired guards armed with machetes and hatchets, and then took to sleeping on top of their seed chests, their sleep disrupted by the distrust of their own guards. And yet people saw through the curtain of rain the spectre of Moustache walking along, carrying bunches of banana and tapioca. There was a rumor that he had taken to capsizing the boats ferrying paddy.
ഷെല്ലയുടെ മരണശേഷമുള്ള മഴ 10 ദിവസം കഴിഞ്ഞും മാറ്റമില്ലാതെ തുടർന്നു. ആരും പുറത്തിറങ്ങാത്ത ദിവസങ്ങളിൽ പുലിക്കുട്ടിശ്ശേരിയിലും മേനോൻകരിയിലും കല്ലിങ്കത്രയിലും ദൂരെ പാടവരമ്പുകളിൽ കൂടി വാവച്ച് നടന്നു പോകുന്നത് കണ്ടവരും. തന്റെ മീശയുടെ അറ്റം മഴയെ നേടാനുള്ള മാറാഞ്ചേമ്പിന്റെ ഇല പോലെ അയാൾ തലയ്ക്ക് മുകളിൽ വിടർത്തി ചൂടിയിരുന്നു. കരിയിലെ മണ്ണാങ്കട്ടയെ എന്ന പോലെ മഴയത്ത് മീശ അയാളെ തുണച്ചു. അയാൾ ഭാഗ്യവാനാണ്. തല ചായ്ക്കാൻ ഇടം തേടി അലയണ്ട. ഇരുട്ടുമ്പോൾ ചെല്ലുന്നിടത്ത് വെച്ച് തന്റെ മീശ കൊണ്ട് ഒരു കൂടാരം പണിത് താമസിക്കാം. ചിലപ്പോൾ ഇതൊക്കെ മഴയത്ത് വിശന്ന് വീടുകളിലിരിക്കുന്നവർക്ക് തോന്നിയ മായക്കാഴ്ചകളാകാനും ഇടയുണ്ട്. കാരണം ചിലർ പറഞ്ഞത് വലിയ നെല്ലുചാക്കുകളും തലയിൽ വെച്ച് മീശ പോകുന്നത് കണ്ടെന്നാണ്. പക്ഷേ അന്ന് ഒരു മണി നെല്ല് പോലും എങ്ങും കിട്ടാനില്ലായിരുന്നു. കുഴച്ചു തിന്നാൻ പിണ്ണാക്കോ തവിടോ പോലും ലഭ്യമല്ലായിരുന്നു. കട്ടൻ കപ്പയിൽ നിന്ന് കുറെ പേർ മരിച്ചു. താറാവിന് എരിഞ്ഞു കൊടുക്കേണ്ട പന മനുഷ്യർ തിന്നു തീർന്നു. മുളകും മല്ലിയും ഇല്ലായിരുന്നത് കൊണ്ട് കിട്ടുന്ന മീനും കക്കായും ഞൗണിക്കായും ഉപ്പും മാത്രം കൊണ്ട് പുഴുങ്ങി തിന്നു. വെളിഞ്ചേമ്പും വാഴമാണവും തീർന്നപ്പോൾ പശു തിന്നുന്ന പുല്ലിലേക്കായി ആളുകളുടെ ശ്രദ്ധ. അടുത്ത കൃഷിക്കായി നെൽവി തുണക്കി സൂക്ഷിച്ച അപൂർവം ക്രിസ്ത്യാനികളും നായന്മാരും വാക്കത്തെയും കൊടാലിയുമായി ആളുകളെ കാവൽ നിർത്തി പത്തായത്തിനുമേൽ കിടന്നുറങ്ങി. കാവൽക്കാരെയും വിശ്വാസമില്ലാതെ ഇടയ്ക്കിടെ ഞെട്ടി ഉണർന്നു. എങ്കിലും ആളുകൾ വലിയ വാഴക്കുലകളും കിഴങ്ങു നിറഞ്ഞ കപ്പമൂടുകളുമായി വിദൂരതയിൽ നടന്നു പോകുന്ന മീശയെ മഴക്കിടയിൽ കൂടി നിഴലായി കണ്ടു. നെല്ലുമായി പോകുന്ന വലിയ വള്ളങ്ങൾ അവൻ മുക്കിക്കളഞ്ഞെന്നും പ്രചാരണമുണ്ടായി.
Thank you. I really didn't want to make any reference to the kind of controversy around the book, because that I think is part of the past. But there is no harm in the readers knowing that, well, there was a controversy, and Hareesh had to withdraw the novel, which was getting serialized in a very significant weekly in Malayalam, Madhubhumi. But what I liked about, one of the things I liked about Hareesh's introduction to the book was his reference to the controversy and his reply to the controversy, which I really want to read. It's just a sentence. The controversy was one around a word which was supposed to be obscene and not generally used in the so-called elite and decent language, referring to a woman's organ. And the other was about the reference to a temple and the reference to God. Sentiments are very easily hurt these days, and so somebody's sentiment got hurt with that. And replying to the whole controversy, Hareesh has these two sentences. There have been protests about this, and I agree that these characters should have shown more care and behaved more responsibly. But novels are free countries, and there is very little a writer can do about what the characters get up to. I think it's a very, very extremely important reply, because Hareesh is replying not only for him, but for all the writers, including me, for all the writers. Because when you write, your characters or those who the subject of your poem or a character in your novel might be speaking, and you cannot attribute the words of the character to the author and say it is the author who is speaking. It is actually the character, and there is a particular context to the use of a word or to the use of a reference or to a conversation, and you cannot just forget the context and blame the author for what the character does or what the character says. So he's speaking for Salman Rushdie. He's speaking for thousands of authors who have run into controversies on account of the kind of characters they created or the context in the fictional works that they had imagined. So and I think it's the perfect justification for and the perfect answer to all those who tried to create a controversy around the novel. Now, I would like Hareesh to say one or two sentences in conclusion. He has been listening to this after his initial introduction. Hareesh, would you just come in and say two or three sentences about the novel or about the translation? Hareesh?
വളരെ സന്തോഷം സാർ. കാരണം ഞാൻ ഈ നോവൽ ട്രാൻസ്ലേറ്റ് ചെയ്യും എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ സമയത്ത് എനിക്ക് വളരെ ആശങ്കകൾ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു ട്രാൻസ്ലേഷനെ കുറിച്ച്. ഇപ്പൊ ജയശ്രീ പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ തന്നെ ഒരുപാട് ലോക്കൽ ലാംഗ്വേജ് പ്രാദേശിക ഭാഷ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നു, ഒരുപാട് സ്ഥലങ്ങളെ കുറിച്ചുള്ള റഫറൻസുകൾ അതിനകത്ത് ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നു. കാരണം അതില്ലാതെ പറ്റില്ല നമുക്ക്. കാരണം കുട്ടനാട്ടിൽ ഓരോ പാടശേഖരത്തിനും ഓരോ പേരുണ്ട്. അത് പറയാതെ നമുക്ക് മുന്നോട്ട് പോകാൻ പറ്റില്ല. അതുകൊണ്ട് എനിക്ക് ഒരുപാട് ആശങ്ക ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. പക്ഷെ ജയശ്രീ അത് സമർത്ഥമായിട്ട് ചെയ്തു. ഞാൻ വിചാരിച്ചതിലും വളരെ നന്നായിട്ട് ചെയ്തു. അതെനിക്ക് വളരെ സന്തോഷമുണ്ട്. ഇംഗ്ലീഷിൽ ഇത് നല്ല പോലെ വായിക്കപ്പെട്ടെന്നാണ് ഞാൻ വിചാരിക്കുന്നത്. ഇനിയും വായിക്കപ്പെടുമെന്ന് ആഗ്രഹിക്കുന്നു. സന്തോഷം.
Yeah, what Hareesh said was that initially he had his own anxieties about the novel being translated, especially because of its linguistic nuances and the linguistic diversity. But ultimately, when the translation came out, he was quite happy to see that it has become a highly readable and a somewhat faithful translation of the novel. And he wants to thank Jayasree for the wonderful work that she did with the original work. I think that could perhaps be a fitting conclusion to what has been a very cordial kind of discussion. And I also want to thank both of you for your wonderful interventions and responses to whatever queries I had. And I hope that all readers interested in fiction will pick up this novel, Moustache. I'm not doing a publicity for HarperCollins. I'm not doing a publicity for the author or the translator, but a publicity for the art of fiction. And so I wish everybody would pick up the novel and read the translation and enjoy the many dimensions of this astonishing work of fiction. Thank you so much.
Thank you, S. Hareesh, Jayasree, and Sachidanandan for that beautiful session. And many congratulations to you. If you all have enjoyed the session, please do share with your friends and family on your social media pages. Thank you all for watching and being a great audience. We promise to be back next week with another exciting session of Jaipur Literature Festival's Words Are Bridges. Thank you. Have a great evening.